Okay, so now let's look at these products in a little bit more detail one by one. So let's start with SPSS, which is, of course, where we began. So it is SPSS. It's a general purpose statistical package. It comes with the server, the client, and then the desktop, which we can consider as offline, which we already looked at. And usually it's the desktop version of SPSS that people order. You can download and install the disk, and as you would kind of expect from any online package, you can install on up to 3 workstations per end user license, and the authorized end user license, is not. It's basically, it's sort of, as we said, it's called an authorized end user license, which means it's not a concurrent user license. In other words, it's kind of offline if you have 2 or 3 people that want to work together. Then it is, it's not. This is not a concurrent license. You can't do that. You can have them working, side by side, but they can't work together. You get one license key in this case. The client versions on a local it would work from or connect to a local server if you're in the client, right? So as opposed to desktop, if you're using client, then you can connect to a local server, and then that gives you concurrent access. So in other words, you have to switch your license from desktop to client in order to get concurrency. And then the server version is much more expensive than the desktop version, and it allows you, of course, to work remotely like we've been looking at. Now, IBM doesn't offer a cloud version of the server product, but other companies do. And essentially it comes down to, like we said, it comes down to where is that data stored, right? Is the data local? Is it local? Is it on the server? Again, you may have this compliance issue, and you can, as we said before, you can export the data to your workstation, assuming you're in this client server setup. And if you're curious about pricing, here is a nice breakdown of the various prices per product. Now notice that these are per year, so if you need a perpetual license that goes beyond just a single year, that is quite a bit more expensive. Notice that you have all of the various features listed nicely in this chart. Also, SPSS by itself is sometimes known as SPSS Statistics to distinguish it from the other products. Now let's look at the IBM SPSS Modeler. Notice that the IBM SPSS Modeler is a client-server system. We talked about that, and that it's Java based. It is, again, it's a data mining product, and it actually, as far as I can tell, I've never seen anywhere that says it includes SPSS. So if you want the SPSS statistics, you'll need to buy that separately. It does not come with the modeler. It lets you build predictive models without any programming, and this is interesting because that was actually, it's one of the major design features when they created the product. It was one of the design goals, I should say. It was one of the main aims, you can see, was to get rid of unnecessary complexity in data transformations and to make complex predictive models very easy to use. Now, the modeler allows you to do natural language processing, and again, without much expertise or domain knowledge of exactly what it is that you are doing. Domain knowledge perhaps, but certainly you don't need to know about all the math behind it, which is very interesting. It'll let you extract data, categorize that data, and then you can add any of that data that you've extracted out into your structured data. So that's where things get interesting. It's where the structured meets the unstructured there. It can also run multiple statistical techniques, rank their performances, and it was previously called Clementine, and then before the acquisition by IBM, and then it was temporarily named PASW. So if you see those names, you'll know what they refer to, and now it's known as IBM SPSS, like all of the other products in the bundle, SPSS Modeler in this case. It also does decision trees, which are sometimes known as ID3, neural networks, which are sometimes known as backprop, and it comes in modeler, desktop, and server. These are things we already talked about. Now, it's also, when it comes to structured data, it'll do DB2 sort of things, mainframes, flat files, Cognos, BI, and it'll also do the unstructured sort of thing with natural language processing. Now, notice that it comes in different editions. There's a professional, there's a premium, and then there's a separate one called Gold, which is what we're going to look at in a second here. That's Gold right there. And it will, it's the premium version that lets you do unstructured analysis. And that also includes social network analysis here. Now, keyless is how this is listed in the BOM, the Bill of Materials. And by that, I mean the IBM Counter Fraud installed products and versions list. Take a look at all of these SPSS products. There's really what we've been talking about. There's the server, there's desktop, there's CNDS, which we'll go into, there's the data access pack, which we'll talk about, there's the statistics itself, desktop, and the server product, and then separately there's the client. Then we have CNDS deployment manager, the gold keyless, which we're going to talk about now, and then there's the the modeler client premium. So these are the major pieces of the SPSS puzzle. There are 11 of them in Counter Fraud Management. Keyless refers to the fact that, in fact, let's look at it as it listed here. Keyless implies that the client software does not require a license key to run, but the reality is that the Modeler Gold installation media comes with a pre-stamped key. And so the end user actually never interacts with the licensing, even though it's still there. As for licensing, it uses Sentinel, which is what IBM i2 uses for Analyst Notebook. Sentinel is a separate product, not by IBM, that manages client and server interactions for licensing. And then there's this Gold product, which is, again, it's part of this, this grouping of different editions. There's professional and there's premium. Gold is sort of a package. You can think of it as the kind of server piece, but actually what it means is this. It's a server, a server 1, server 2, and server 1 is actually going to include the CNDS machine, and then server 2 will include the modeler. Again, no SPSS statistics, just those two pieces, and then the clients, and you can see the various clients, listed there. So that is essentially the modeler. SPSS Modeler product. And there's a distributed access mode. There's actually two modes. There's a local mode and a distributed access mode, where the local analysis, this is sometimes referred to as desktop. We've been calling it essentially the desktop version. It's the offline version. It's the version that does not allow you to have concurrent licensing. It's one person at a time, and that's all local, as opposed to the distributed one, which does allow those things. Now, separately, there's another product called CADS, CNDS, and this is a nice article here, which looks like this, and I'll let you read through this. We've actually covered most of what it goes into, but essentially, again, if you have multiple analysts using the, especially using the modeler, you can share the assets across those different users. It also is intended for automation, and it does a good job of scoring, which is, as it says, is using a predictive model to read real input data to produce a prediction. And that's a big part of what it does and what ICFM uses it to do. And then there's also asset lifecycle management. So if you have dev, test, prod scenarios, that's the intention of that product. And then also it can handle it does this model management. So again, that lets you collaborate, lets you automate, deploy, and the deployment manager is sort of interesting. And actually, just so you can see what it is that these assets they're talking about are, here's a list of them: outputs, model palettes, streams. That's probably the biggest one, and the key. And actually, a stream, by the way, we'll cover this later. It's more like a flow, an integration flow in the case of IIB, for example. And that takes us to the data collection. So the SPSS data collection is a surveying tool. You can, for example, create a website with it and the data for collecting data from surveys, and then the data will be easily pushed into SPSS. You can see it helps with reporting in that case. And interestingly, this has a JDBC driver with it. However, notice that SPSS itself does not use JDBC. It uses ODBC, and you cannot use JDBC at all. In fact, it does not support JDBC. So you will have to have an ODBC driver. Now, ODBC drivers are implemented through a company called Progress.com, which issues or creates this DataDirect Connect. And it's a high-performance ODBC connection. And when you install it, it's going to look like this, so that it gives you a kind of package, essentially, of lots of different ODBC connections for different vendors. So here's DB2, there's Informix, you can see Oracle, there's SQL, and it's a quick way to get up and running, and it's a quick high-performance way to get up and running. Now, the interesting thing about, and actually the reason that you even have to install or that it comes with DataDirect is because of this right here. It includes or provides the driver manager for ODBC. Now, the reason that's important and interesting is because of this chart here, where you can see ODBC, which is actually quite old, will connect into the data source, but in order to do that, the application, which in our case is going to be some SPSS product, needs to connect into your database, say MySQL Server, and in order to do that, it needs a driver manager. And the driver manager is provided by DataDirect, so by Progress.com. And then if you're curious, here is a comparison between JDBC and ODBC architecture. And this is Progress.com's website, where you can see get high-performing ODBC connectivity for any data source on any platform. And notice too that protocol, that product, the DataDirect product, is sometimes known as wire protocol. In fact, internally, when you are setting up the connections, you may see something called wire protocol. If you do see that, you'll know that it's part of DataDirect here. There are two other products we don't use in ICFM, but they are products that came in with what IBM purchased. That is AMOS and Text Analytics for Surveys. And I'll let you read this if you're interested in that.